There is a law that governs the cosmos from the beginning of time. Light always precedes darkness, but darkness always returns. Not as an option, not as a possibility, as an absolute certainty. And when it returns, it does so with surgical precision, erasing all traces of comfort, hope, and certainty. There was a prophecy that humanity decided to forget, to bury under layers of skepticism and modern comfort. But the ancient texts preserved it. The saints feared it. And those who studied it in silence understood something terrible. It was not a metaphor. The 3 days of darkness. A warning that appears fragmented across different eras, in various voices, but always with the same anatomy of terror. 3 days in which the sun will refuse to rise. 3 days in which electricity, candles, any source of light created by human hands will go out as if they never existed. 3 days in which sealed doors will be the only barrier between life and something that texts refuse to name directly. The first mention appears in Exodus, the 9th plague of Egypt. 3 days of darkness so dense that the scriptures say it could be touched, felt, as if it were a physical substance that entered the lungs. Pharaoh had resisted 8 plagues, frogs, locusts, ulcers, hail falling like frozen fire. But when the darkness came, something changed. The Egyptians could not move. They were paralyzed in their own homes, feeling the presence of something else in the darkness. Only the Israelites had light in their homes, a surgical division between the marked and the abandoned. But that was only the rehearsal. Centuries later, in the year 33 AD, while a man was dying nailed to a cross on the outskirts of Jerusalem, the sky darkened at noon. It was not an eclipse. Eclipses last minutes. This lasted 3 hours. The historian Tallow, a pagan who had no interest in validating Christianity, recorded the anomaly. He called it the most inexplicable darkness. In Greece, in Rome, in Egypt, the scribes noted the same. The sun died in the middle of the day. And when it returned, the veil of the temple had torn from top to bottom. The dead walked through Jerusalem. Reality itself had suffered a fracture. We advance to the 13th century. Saint Hildegard of Bingen, a German mystic, doctor, composer, a mind that the church could neither ignore nor silence, had a vision. She saw a future time when humanity would reach its peak of technological and moral arrogance. And at that moment, a purification would come. Not by water, as in the days of Noah. By darkness. A darkness that would arrive unannounced, lasting exactly 3 days. And during those 3 days, released demons would roam the earth seeking those who were not protected by faith and obedience. She warned, do not look out the windows, do not open the doors, no matter what voice pleads from the other side. Saint Hildegard was not the only one. In the 19th century, in Ireland, Blessed Anna Maria Taigi experienced visions so vivid that the Catholic Church initiated 3 separate investigations. Each time, they concluded the same. This woman was not crazy. Her prophecies were too consistent, too detailed. She described the 3 days of darkness with clinical precision. She said they would begin after a series of unprecedented wars after humanity fell into global apostasy. The event would be announced by a red cross in the sky. Then darkness would come. During those 3 days, the air would be poisoned. Breathing outside would mean instant death. Only blessed beeswax candles would burn inside sealed houses. Nothing else. No flashlights, no electricity, no common fire. And outside, in the darkness, creatures she could not describe with human words would roam the streets. In France, Marie-Julie Jahenny, stigmatized and visionary of the 19th century, repeated the same warning with disturbing variations. She added a detail. 2/3 of humanity would perish during those 3 days. Not only because of the creatures, but because of terror itself. People who would open doors out of curiosity. People who would look out the windows. People who would lose faith at 42 minutes into the second day and would run out screaming into nothingness. And they would never return. Father Pio, the Italian saint of the 20th century, a man who bore the wounds of Christ on his own body, also spoke of this. Not in public sermons, in private conversations, in letters that were only made public decades after his death. He described the same sequence: signs in the sky, total darkness, the absolute need to stay inside with blessed candles and holy water. He warned that it would be worse than any war, worse than any pandemic, because there would be no place to hide except in faith. And for many, that faith would no longer exist. So the question arises that no one wants to ask. Why does this prophecy appear again and again in different eras, on different continents, on the lips of people who never knew each other? We could dismiss it as mass hysteria, but mass hysteria does not produce narrative consistency over 8 centuries. It does not produce identical technical details in visions separated by 1,000 kilometers and 300 years. Modern science has taught us to distrust what we cannot measure. But here is the problem. Each of these visions occurred before the possibility of instant global communication existed, before the internet, before the telegraph. Hildegard could not have read Gehenny because Gehenny was born 600 years later, and yet the warnings coincide even in the smallest details. The candles must be made of pure beeswax, not paraffin, not synthetic. Why this specificity? The texts do not explain it, they only insist. The windows must be completely covered, not with blinds, with blankets, with wood, with anything that prevents seeing outside. Because what is outside should not be seen by human eyes. And the doors sealed, not closed, sealed. Because voices will come. Voices of loved ones, voices of crying children. Perfect voices, indistinguishable from real ones. And whoever opens, whoever gives in to instinctive compassion, will not see again until the 4th day. Skeptics argue that these are simply projections of medieval fear of eclipses, of misunderstood astronomical phenomena. But that explanation collapses under the weight of specifics. An eclipse does not require blessed candles. An eclipse does not kill 2/3 of humanity. An eclipse is not accompanied by creatures scratching windows and whispering the names of those inside. So, what explains the consistency? One possibility that contemporary theologians avoid discussing publicly is this. Visions are not predictions. They are memories. Memories of something that already happened in a previous cycle of human history. Something so traumatic that it was imprinted in the collective unconscious of the species, manifesting as prophecy in sensitive minds. Ancient Mesopotamian texts speak of periods of darkness that preceded great floods. The Vedic texts of India describe a Kali Yuga, an era of darkness that arrives when Dharma falls below a critical threshold. The Aztecs believed that the sun needed to be fed with blood because it had already died 4 times before, and each death of the sun meant the end of a complete era. But that interpretation, although fascinating, does not solve the core problem. If it is a memory, why did the Catholic saints of the 19th century experience it as something future? Why did Padre Pio, in the full 20th century, warn that it had not yet arrived? The most unsettling answer is also the simplest, because it has not happened yet. Not in this iteration of civilization, and the signs of its proximity are exactly what the seers described. Global wars that reshape continents, collapse of moral structures that seemed eternal, technology advancing so rapidly that ethics cannot keep up. A generation that can communicate instantly with anyone on the planet, but cannot hold a face-to-face conversation without paralyzing anxiety. Idolatry disguised as individualism. Pride presented as empowerment. And a systematic mockery of the sacred, not necessarily out of malice, but out of forgetfulness. Driven by the conviction that the old is synonymous with false. Santa Hildegarda said that darkness would come when humanity had reached its peak of confidence in its own power. Not when it was weaker, when it was stronger. When humans felt like gods, look around you. We are editing human genes, creating artificial intelligences that write poetry and diagnose cancer better than doctors. We have put machines on Mars. We are seriously talking about colonizing other planets, about defeating death itself through consciousness transfer. The cover of every tech magazine promises that immortality is only 20 years away. Every decade, that number remains 20, and meanwhile, suicide rates continue to rise. Loneliness is an officially recognized epidemic by the World Health Organization. Birth rates are collapsing in all developed countries. People have more digital connections than ever, but fewer real friends. More information, less wisdom. More options, less satisfaction. More power, less meaning. This is the exact pattern that the seers described. Not an external collapse first, an internal collapse. a draining of the collective soul. And only then, when arrogance reaches its perfect zenith, will come the correction. The 3 days of darkness are not an arbitrary punishment. They are a mathematical response. When a system strays too far from balance, nature corrects it violently. A forest that grows too dense needs a fire to regenerate. A fever kills the infection. And a civilization that completely forgets where it came from, that erases all connection with the transcendent, needs to be reset. But here is the detail that sets this prophecy apart from all others. It is not democratic. Not everyone survives simply by being good or moral, according to human standards. The instructions are clear and non-negotiable. Blessed beeswax candles, holy water, crucifixes, rosaries, active faith not nominal, sealed doors, covered windows, constant prayer for 3 full days without interruption. This deeply offends modern sensibilities. It sounds arbitrary, almost cruel. Why specifically blessed candles? Why not any act of kindness, any demonstration of humanity? Why only those who follow specific religious rules? The answer, according to the theology that supports these prophecies, is that it is not about rules. It is about recognition. The blessed candles do not have magical power. They are a symbol of acknowledgement that a higher order exists. That reality is not neutral. That there are forces operating beyond the reach of material science, and that protection against these forces requires conscious alignment with the sacred. In other words, the 3 days of darkness are a test of humility. And humility is not a virtue that this era cultivates. Imagine for a moment that the warning is real. That within this decade, or the next, after some event that completely reorganizes the geopolitical landscape, the sky begins to show strange signs. Auroras in places where they have never appeared. A visible Red Cross worldwide. And then, without warning, the sun simply does not rise. In the early hours, there would be confusion. People would check their phones. News reports would try to explain it. Scientists would propose hypotheses. A massive solar storm, an atmospheric anomaly, an unprecedented electromagnetic phenomenon. And all of that would be instantly ignored because the phones would stop working. Power plants would shut down. Generators would fail. Batteries would run out in minutes, as if energy itself were being drained by something. And then the sounds would begin. Scratches on the doors, gentle knocks on the windows. Voices, perfect. Your mother calling your name. Your child crying that they are afraid. Your partner begging you to open, that something is chasing them. And you would know, if you had read the warnings, that it is not real, that it is a test. But human instinct is to respond, to protect, to help. And that instinct, in those 3 days, would be the trap. Those who opened the doors would find exactly what the voices promised, their loved ones. For 3 seconds, before the illusion faded and what was really on the other side was revealed. And worse, those who remained inside would hear what happens afterward. The screams, the silence, the scratching that now comes from inside the wall. On the second day, despair would be total. Without electricity, without communication, without a way to know if anyone else is surviving. The families who prepared would be gathered, praying softly, each hour longer than the previous. Those who did not prepare would be in complete darkness, without candles, without food, without holy water, hearing things move in the blackness of their own homes. Because according to the prophecies, the entities are not only outside, they are everywhere where the sacred light does not repel them. And then there is the detail that no one mentions, but is in all the texts: the smell. Marie-Julie Jahenny said that the air would smell of sulfur. Padre Pio said it would smell of death. Not recent death, ancient death. As if something that had been buried for millennia had finally come to the surface. On the third day, according to visions, everything would reach its peak. The creatures would become more desperate. Attacks on the doors would be violent. And some believers, even some prepared ones, would give in. Not necessarily due to lack of faith, but because of exhaustion. The psychological weight of 72 hours of uninterrupted terror. 3 days without sleep, without rest, only prayer and vigilance. And then at dawn on the 4th day, everything would end as abruptly as it began. The sun would rise, but the world it would illuminate would be unrecognizable. The streets would be empty. 2/3 of the population gone. Not necessarily bodies, just absence. Houses with open doors and no one inside. Cars stopped in the middle of the roads without drivers. And those who survived would come out slowly, blinking at the light, unable to fully process what had just happened. The prophecies say that afterward an era of peace will come. But not because humanity has learned a lesson. Rather because the number of humans will have been reduced to a manageable size. Because those who remain will be only those who prove to be aligned with something greater than themselves. And with fewer people, less complexity, fewer temptations, it will be possible to rebuild something like a temporary Eden. Until, generations later, their descendants forget. Until they build towers again. Until they declare themselves gods again. And the cycle begins again. But there is another interpretation, one that the most radical theologians propose in private conversations. What if the 3 days of darkness are not a single event? What if they are a metaphor that is constantly updated? What if each generation faces its own version of 3 days, in which everything they believed to be true collapses? For some, it was the Black Plague. For others, the World Wars. For others, the Holocaust. And for this generation, it might be something we still cannot name, because we are in the middle of it. That interpretation is more comfortable, more metaphorical, more acceptable to modern minds. But it does not explain the consistency of the physical details. It does not explain why hundreds of saints and visionaries insisted on the same thing. Beeswax candles, not metaphors. Sealed doors, not psychological boundaries. 3 literal days, not 3 historical eras. And it does not explain the fact that each ancient civilization has an identical history. The Mayans spoke of the end of the 5th sun. The Hindus of Kali Yuga, which ends in fire and renewal. The Norse of Fimbulwinter, 3 years of winter without summer before Ragnarok. The Australian Aborigines of a time of sleep that is reversed. Different cultures, same pattern. Darkness, purification, rebirth. It is not possible that all these civilizations, separated by oceans and millennia, invented the same story by coincidence. Which leaves 2 options. Either they are all remembering the same ancestral event, or they are all perceiving the same future event. And if it is the future, if it truly is coming, then the question that matters is not when, but are you prepared? And this is where discomfort becomes unbearable. Because preparing requires accepting premises that the modern world has completely rejected. It requires accepting that the sacred is real, that there are forces beyond the reach of science. That faith is not a psychological placebo, but a spiritual technology with measurable effects. And it requires humility. The admission that despite all our technology, all our knowledge, all our enlightened arrogance, we are fundamentally vulnerable to things we cannot control. Modern preppers store food, water, generators, they build bunkers, they accumulate weapons. And all of that would be completely useless during the 3 days of darkness. Because generators will not work, flashlights will go out, and weapons do not fire against things that should not exist. The only thing that will work, according to the prophecies, is spiritual preparation. And most people don't even know where to start with that. We live in an era where meditating for 5 minutes is considered an achievement, where reading a book without distractions is almost impossible, where the idea of praying a full rosary sounds as archaic as using a typewriter. And yet, that is exactly what seers say will save lives. Not intelligence, not money, not connections, only active faith, only real spiritual practice, not vague concepts about positive energy and loving universe. This is what makes prophecy so terrifying for the modern mind. It's not dragons or demons. It's the requirement of submission, the demand that you acknowledge you are not in control, that you never were, and that your survival depends entirely on your willingness to trust in something you cannot see, measure, or understand. For an atheist, this is impossible. There is no way out. If the 3 days come, simply die, not out of divine punishment, but because they refuse to accept the conditions of survival. Like someone who refuses to wear a life jacket because they don't believe in water. For an agnostic, there is a small window, a 3% chance. The possibility that, when the time comes, when the darkness is real and tangible, their mind will finally accept what it previously rejected. And at that moment, if they have candles and holy water stored just in case, they might survive. Not out of faith, but out of pragmatic caution that accidentally meets the requirements. But for the nominal believer, the one who claims to be Christian but hasn't prayed in years, the one who has a crucifix because his grandmother gave it to him but never goes to Mass, the prophecies are particularly cruel. Because he will think he is prepared. He will say, "I am Catholic," or "I am Christian," as if it were an automatic membership. And when darkness arrives, he will discover that nominal faith is not faith at all. It is just a cultural label. And labels do not repel demons. Only the practicing believer remains. The one who maintains an active relationship with the sacred. The one who prays regularly. The one who goes to Mass. The one who takes the sacraments seriously. And according to the prophecies, that will be the one who has the necessary tools when the time comes. Not because he is a better person, but because he built the spiritual muscle needed to withstand 72 hours of absolute terror without breaking. And here is the final twist, the one no one wants to consider. What if the darkness has already begun? Not physically, not yet, but metaphorically. A cultural darkness, a psychological darkness, an era in which truth has become relative, in which each person creates their own reality, in which there is no shared north, in which everything is questionable except the right to question. The saints described a darkness that could be touched. Perhaps what they did not understand, what they could not articulate in the language of their time, is that darkness is not only the absence of light. It is the absence of meaning. It is nihilism turned into atmosphere. It is the existential void felt by a generation that can buy anything but does not know what is worth buying. That can be anything but does not know what is worth being. And in that interpretation, the 3 days are already here. They have been here for decades. And most people are living in total darkness without realizing it because they never knew the light. The blessed candles, then, are not magical objects. They are symbols of connection to something greater. They are reminders that reality has a structure, an order, a meaning that existed before you and will exist after you. And when everything else fails, when the electricity goes out and phones die and modern certainties evaporate, the only thing left is that connection, or its absence. Sealed doors are not just physical. They are psychological. Limits. The ability to say, "I will not panic. I will not give in to fear. I will not open the door just because the voice sounds convincing." In an era of instant gratification, of giving in to the first impulse, of doors permanently open to any stimulus, that ability is almost extinct. And prayer that lasts for 3 days. That is not mysticism. It is attention training. It is the skill, almost superhuman in this era, of maintaining focus on a single thing for more than 5 minutes. Not getting distracted. Not collapsing under the weight of boredom or terror. Continuing to breathe, to focus, to trust, even when every instinct screams that you should run. These are not skills that are developed the night before a crisis. They are built day after day, prayer after prayer, decision after decision. And most people do not have these skills, not because they are bad, but because they never needed them. Until now. So, what do you do with this information? Do you dismiss it as medieval superstition? Do you add it to the list of conspiracy theories to explore on YouTube at 3 in the morning? Or do you do something that deeply unsettles you? Take seriously the possibility that generations of saints, seers, and mystics saw something real. And if you take it seriously, what changes? Do you buy beeswax candles? Do you bless water? Do you start praying even if you're not sure someone is listening? Do you tell your family to prepare for something that sounds completely insane? Or you just go on with your life, trusting that if something like that happens, science will have an explanation and technology will have a solution? Trusting that 2,000 years of warnings from saints can be safely ignored because, after all, it hasn't happened yet. And the things that haven't happened yet probably never will. That's the bet. And it's irreversible. Because if the prophecies are true, there will be no second chance. There will be no time to investigate when the sky darkens. There will be no Amazon Prime delivering blessed candles in 2 hours. There will be no YouTube tutorials on how to properly seal windows. There will only be what you prepared beforehand. Or nothing. And that is the true discomfort of the 3 days of darkness. It is not the horror of the creatures or the physical darkness. It is the horror of personal responsibility. The demand that you decide now, while there is still light, while there is still time, which reality you choose to live in. One where you are the center and the universe is neutral and everything is explainable and controllable. Or one where you are small and vulnerable, and there are forces much greater than you, and your survival depends on your humility. There is no middle ground. There is no maybe a little of both. Because when the darkness comes, if it comes, reality will choose for you. And you will discover, in those 72 eternal hours, if you chose correctly. So, what reality are you living in right now? The one you built with your own logic and comfort, or the one warned about for 2,000 years? Because one of those realities is an illusion, and you won't know which until it's too late to change your mind. The darkness is waiting. It has always been. The question is not if it will arrive. The question is, will you be inside when it does, with the candles lit and the door sealed? Or will you be outside, in the absolute blackness, wondering why you didn't hear?